The session is moderated by Dan Barry, who is the CEO of Delete and Kagool. I hope I pronounced that right.
Very good. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Dan. And I'll hand it over to you. Have a great session.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction and the invite to be involved today. So very happy to be on this stage and this track around the future of work and HR, and more specifically around talking about how things might change with the new normal post-pandemic, and as you mentioned earlier, very specifically having a discussion about what kind of tools could help us and enable this workforce of the future going forward. And to help me do that today, I'm joined by two fellow panelists, Will and Julian, who I'll be asking to introduce themselves in a moment. But just to briefly introduce myself as the moderator or chair for this today, my name's Dan Berry. As I mentioned earlier, CEO of Delete Kagool. That name is a result of a merger that took place last year between two agencies, Delete and Kagool. So you can probably see what we did with the name there, but shortly to be rebranded. So you might want to keep an eye out for that. In terms of the business that I run, it's a 200 head strong European digital agency that focuses on designing customer experience and also working with digital experience technologies. And today I'm particularly interested to see what Will and Julian have to say, because with a headcount of 200, the kind of way of working post and during pandemic has been put into stark relief. So maybe I could ask you, Julian, to introduce yourself and a bit about your background and the business you work and have founded recently.
Sure. Good morning from early morning from sunny San Francisco. And I'm Julian Green. I have been in San Francisco now for over 20 years. This is my fifth startup. I've been very fortunate. The other four have all worked, and three got bought, one went public. And so this is my fifth one, and really excited with Headroom to try and tackle a problem that has been a problem for a long time, which is that meetings aren't as fun or as good as they should be. And we'll talk more about how we're doing that with AI video conferencing in this session.
Thank you, Julian. I'm looking forward to that. And if I could also now bring in Will to introduce himself, that would be brilliant.
Thanks, Dan. My name is Will Hambling. I'm the founder and creative director at Within International. We are an agency based in London, Bucharest, and Hong Kong. Our client base is professional services, so the legal sector, real estate, finance, etc. And I'm here really to talk to you about a product that has been about 10 years in the making, but really we've only been talking about it for the last year, and that is Enter Agora. Enter Agora is an extension of the real world and a new way to do business. It touches on events, but it touches on lots of the areas that Sammy mentioned in our introduction about wellness, about inclusivity, and has a real sharp focus on ESG as well. So thanks for inviting me. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Brilliant, thanks, Will. So both you guys mentioned some interesting points there about some of the technologies that you're working with, developing to enable the future work. But before we kind of get into that, I was kind of interested to start with, what are your thoughts around the bigger picture post, or well, we're not quite out of the pandemic yet, but the restrictions are easing. So, we've had a really clear year of lockdown and that's changing. So how do you see work changing in the future in terms of returning to office, not as the case may be? Maybe I can throw that one over to you, Julian, to start with, kick us off.
Sure. California or San Francisco is in relatively good shape with COVID, and folks have started to go back to some of the things they were doing before COVID. I mean, it's an amazing experiment. Everyone for a year, get out of your offices and stay at home and try and work. And we've learned a lot from it. And I hope that we keep some of the good bits and that it broadens the number of options people have to work either as they did before in offices or workplaces, or to embrace all the positives of being able to work remote, whether it's no commute or being able to access talent wherever it is. For me, a chance to occasionally have lunch with my family and all the benefits of being closer to home.
And all the interruptions you get during conference calls as well, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you do get an interesting insight into people's lives that you don't get when you just see them at the office. You can tell that one of my children really likes giraffes, So I think that I hope that it'll broaden all the options and that people will be able to find the right way of working for them, and that some of the tools we're talking about and a lot of the tools that have been developed to help us through COVID will make work better.
Great, thanks, Julian. Well, taking those points together, how do you think that will translate? Do you think it will be a commoditized solution where everyone will do their own thing, or do you think it will settle into some overall kind of general pattern, where the majority will work in a certain way? Or can we not think in those terms anymore? Can we not generalize as it was, office, home? Is that too simple and black and white nowadays?
Well, I certainly hope it is. I mean, history tells us that whenever there's a big change, we end up reverting to type. I agree with Julian. I hope some of the good things that we've learned over the last 18 months we keep hold of and we carry on going forward with. But I don't see it as a two-model solution, whether it be working from home or working in an office. I think working from anywhere and working from everywhere is where we should be looking. I think we should be giving people access to each other in a way that they've never had before. The work environment, it depends what we mean by work. I'm always very interested in looking at meetings, and I will certainly be looking at Julian's product, by the way, because I think it's super helpful and powerful. We'll hear about that in the next few minutes. But a lot of work isn't done in meetings. A lot of work is done organically. It's that meet at the water cooler moment that people always refer to. I've had many great ideas just standing in the kitchen talking to one of our design team. When we consider that we're separating people into two models, whether they be working from home or they're working at the office, we divide these people. And the only connection that those people then have is through meetings. And making meetings better and making them more powerful will help. But I think we need to go a step further. We need to give people the opportunity to be in a place. Now, that's going to have to rely on virtual technology. That's very complicated. There's lots of people looking at it. But I think we need to think about it in a more open-minded fashion. I think it will become commoditized. I think you will end up having a standard, but I think there's lots of room for lots of other opportunities. 20, 30 years ago, no one was thinking about anything like WeWork. 15 years ago, no one's really thinking about Airbnb. There are other ways to do things. It requires brave people with big ideas. And I think people who trust their people, leaders who trust their people to be able to work in different ways. I think that's the future. So I think there'll be an amalgamation of options that we all have.
Sure. And from my personal experience, having, like I said, an agency with 200 odd people, I think it's absolutely imperative to have a model like that. As talented, skilled people want the best of everything, as we all know, especially the youngsters nowadays. And why shouldn't they? That's that innovation that's coming through that we can all learn from. I was interested. You talked about the challenge of the physical divide that can come from office and home. We'll talk about some of the next gen tools that can support and close that gap. But Julian, from your perspective, any other challenges that occur to you that we need to be thinking about solving with this new commoditized approach to work, and where and who we might be working with given any given day?
Yeah, I mean, we're a startup that started just before COVID, but hired most of our team, during the isolation of COVID, and so we were sort of born remote in that sense. I haven't met all of the people in my company. We've never all been in the same room, and it's definitely different for me from my previous companies. And it throws up some interesting challenges. And I think, coordination is one of them. And there are tools being developed so that people, now that we're all vaccinated and we can get together, when is a meeting virtual? When is a meeting going to be in person? Given what we want to achieve in a particular get together, some things are more productive when you're together, and some work maybe even better when you're remote. So when we do user experience testing, and when we want to look together at a product design and create together, those are occasions when we want to be in the same room and staring at the same screen or looking at the same object, and then other times when it would be better for everyone to be pounding away on their keyboards, whether that's alone or together, then it's better for us to be remote. So just coordinating that, I think one of the big challenges we've talked about, sort of this flexibility, this sort of so-called hybrid, where some people are remote, some people are in the room. I think the big problem before COVID was that if you were remote, you were essentially a second-class citizen. And so if there were a bunch of people in a conference room and you had a small, webcam sort of, pinhole view of that, you couldn't really see anything that was going on. If someone went to the whiteboard, you couldn't see that. You couldn't see expressions. It was very hard to know when to participate. And so often the person on the phone was sort of ignored. And
funnily enough, Julian, we talked about this the other day as well, didn't we? That you can have the opposite problem sometimes in changing the dynamic of several people in a room to try and make the one person who isn't there feel included as well.
Deferring to the person who wasn't there. So just a very unnatural, communication, very stilted. No one knows when to speak. And so as we go back to perhaps the ability to be more in the office, we'll go back to those hybrid situations. Maybe there'll be more people remote and fewer people in the office, but you'll still have to try and make it equal for all those people to have a good human, natural communication. And that's something at Headroom that we are trying to use AI to take the work away from the people so that they can meet naturally, and then augment the non-verbal communication. So, we allow you to do gestures without having to, click your mouse. And I want to do a thumbs up. Now, where's my mouse? So instead, you just flash a gesture, and it gives you a read for the group of what the engagement level is. So if, when I started this a minute ago, everyone was super engaged, and now they're getting a bit bored, then maybe I should, stop or ask a question. So those types of things to help.
Or a virtual klaxon of some sort to keep people on their toes. I mean, again, we were talking in the green room earlier. It would be good maybe to have some sort of AI that predicts a child barging into the room from what we were talking about. So I'm sure that would come into handy sometimes. So, I mean, we're now kind of getting into it, guys, in the sense that, there are lots of interesting tools out there, and it'd be interesting to pick back up with you in a moment, Julian, about AI and its application in the kind of when you are in a hybrid model and how we are talking and dealing with each other. But I was kind of interested just to go back to what Will was talking about earlier and how to bridge that physical divide by working virtually, because so much of what we do in our recreational time with online games, etc., is in a virtual world. So why not the business world? So I'd be really interested to hear some more thoughts around that, and how you think that could initially get adopted, but also then evolve and take off in the coming months, years, etc.
Yeah, thanks. That's an interesting question. So our product Enter Agora is an extension of the real world. It's a virtual headquarters. It's an event space. It's a meeting point. It's a wellness area. It's whatever you want it to be. And it allows people to maneuver around a space and see and interact with each other using their voice, as well as typing, as well as seeing live broadcast, all of the things that you would normally see in an event. And it's interesting because you talked about how it develops. The product was born when people started asking us, how do we have events now? And I'll be honest with you, the first time our key client called and said, look, Will, we've hired a venue. It's costing us close to $2 million US. We've got a $1.3 million budget to get people there. What do we do? And I said, cancel as soon as you can. Get as much money back as possible, because at that stage, the early points of COVID, there wasn't anything to do. But But we'd been thinking about this. We did some work with the United Nations 6 or 7 years ago now, and we were posed a question: what can the creative industries do to improve their impact on the planet? And we put on a lot of events. Events are brilliant, and events should never be replaced, and face-to-face meetings are amazing. But do we really need to fly 200 people from all over the world to Orlando in order for them to have a meaningful experience? Or can we create a meaningful experience for them? And in so doing, create fun, interest. Can we create an environment where you can still be late for a breakout session? And the development that you're talking about is interesting. So when we first started talking to clients about this, our first client was World Economic Forum. Every client, with the exception of World Economic Forum, to their credit, has tried to project what they normally do onto the virtual world. So I need 27 breakout rooms, and they're broken into 8 people, and we need to do this. It's like, okay, you can do the breakout rooms. People don't need to be in the room. They can be wandering around looking at an exhibition and still have an ear in on what's going on. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to replicate all of the things that are good about being able to connect with one another. And if you apply this to a working environment, those water cooler moments, but also be able to add a layer of knowledge. We can tell our clients who went where in a space. My line manager could identify the fact that, I don't tend to spend a lot of time integrating with other people within the space. And why is that? And does someone need to put their arm around Will?
So Will, on that point, that's very interesting. So would you see that virtual environment almost bringing up analytics to support well-being, to understand how people are interacting and engaging?
Absolutely. Loneliness is a massive issue. CNN have been talking about it actually since last April. Obviously, it coincided with COVID, but I'm blessed. I've got a family. I've got my own space in which I work. But there are other people that I know that are sharing dining room tables with other roommates, in central London. They don't have the ability to really interact. The only time they get to talk is on a Zoom call. Zoom is what we use, or Slack. But really, to just be in a space, just someone you wanders past, and you have this bump-in moment, and you can sit and have a chat about whatever you want. It really breaks down those barriers of loneliness. It's very difficult to criticize platforms like Zoom because without them, we really would have had, we just never would have got here.
Well, the ability, many industries obviously couldn't work from home because of the very nature of it. But obviously many of us in our professional services roles have been able to, and that's been great. And as you said, personally, I found it very good to work from home. And I think Julian said about not meeting his team. Well, I'm going to raise him one by trying to do an acquisition without meeting your team. So that's been interesting. So, but tying those things together, I think something like with Agora is going to, in the virtual space, it's like you said, the World Economic Forum looking at on how to pioneer and push things forward. But obviously the kind of conferencing, video calls, Teams, Zoom, whatever we're, about its very definition, are a bit more in front of us right now. So, what are your thoughts, Julian? You mentioned about, second-class citizens, and I really empathise and agree with that. What do you think we can do to, and using tools like your own and tying it together with what Will was saying, increase that inclusion, that well-being, and make using tools to, in the short term, how do you see that improving the situation with members of staff who, for whatever reason, can't come to the office or choose not to?
Yeah, I think Will said we've got these tools, sort of these old tools, which allow us to meet and to communicate in some ways. The things that he's talking about with Agora and that we're trying to do at Headroom, I think go to the next stage. So rather than just being able to see and hear each other, which the tools like Zoom and so on have done a nice job of sort of getting the pixels and the audio bits there on time. How do you enable people to communicate normally and naturally? And whether it's some of the spatial audio and spatial visualization pieces, whether it's taking away, we believe that busy people in meetings who are taking notes and trying to facilitate and trying to engage is just way too much to do. You can't meet. I personally have felt terrible when I'm talking to someone and I'm pretending to pay attention to them, but I'm typing away, trying to take down the very interesting things that they're saying verbatim, which makes it impossible for me to actually pay attention to them. And so you'll say, say that again. What was that last bit? And so, we transcribe everything that people are saying automatically, so you don't have to type. And it's easy to turn that transcript text into notes with just a click or a gesture to add that to your notes. And then, you don't feel like you're missing something if it goes past you, because you have a recording that is available just to those in the meeting. To be able to go back and look at things, you can search that meeting information knowledge base and go back. So in the moment, you're relaxed because you have the ability to go back. You don't have to take notes, so it takes a lot of weight away from you. And then you want to also give people cues on when to speak and how to give that nonverbal feedback that you get in a room. In a room, you can sort of feel whether people are with you or not. You can, you get head nods and, people may lean in. You can also tell when people are, not with you and asleep and you can feel it. And so augmenting that, so to give you the right nudges. So, my kids have been on school on Zoom, with their teachers, and they might have their hand up and the teachers wouldn't know. And so the teachers end up, the kids end up shouting out, teachers end up muting them, and you end up with
chaos ensues. Absolutely.
So we say someone's got their hand up, and so we think there's a question about this. How do you do hybrid? That room that previously had one webcam at the end. I think people will, in order to be able to meet equally, whether you're remote or whether you're in person, I think people will need something capturing them locally. So instead of a small camera way away on the wall, you probably have your laptop in front of you. It will be capturing your video and audio, so you'll be able to look at people. They'll be able to look at you. We've sort of wondered with recording and cameras whether people feel comfortable in this brave new world. The nice thing about knowing that this is just available to the people in the meeting, it's not some sort of surveillance, your boss is checking whether you're actually, meeting or not, making this very much individual productivity and tool. People seem to love that. And so
I think that's a really important point, Julian, and maybe we'll come back to that in the Q&A afterwards, because people have mentioned about are there some ethical constraints around this kind of thing? Can AI get it wrong sometimes that you are actually paying attention when you're not? But I think that's perhaps an interesting conversation point for us to pick up in a moment. I was just thinking around we were talking about the challenges, and in the context of this talk is really good. It's, in the sense it's next generation, isn't it? And I'm maybe using a bit of an analogy. I remember the first email client, showing my age here. And I think about where we are now and going back to what you were talking about, Will, the next generation, the next iteration, we're moving towards, greater tooling, greater ability to get productivity. What do you see are, the challenges to adoption? Because taking the virtual event, I think lots of people like a drink after an event, and the virtual element is there, but then also the physical, having a bit of a party, and dare I say it, my last event was at Orlando actually, so I felt a bit guilty when you said that earlier, my carbon footprint, but being open and honest about it, great idea, enter Agora, but what do you see as some of the hurdles for you in sort of driving or seeing the industry take that kind of adoption up?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. You can't replicate everything, and just so you don't feel too bad, I was in Orlando 2 years ago as well for an event.
Great stuff.
I'm guilty of the Orlando event. You mentioned having a drink afterwards, which is literally every single client that we have, and everyone that we've spoken to said, "Well, how do we have a drink at the end of the day?" And obviously, you can't. But what we have done is have some really interesting conversations with various vendors. The idea that I could see you and Julian at a virtual bar. Almost everyone asks for a bar, even though you can't have a drink. They like the atmosphere. We build virtual bars for them to walk around and connect and network in. But because you can make purchases directly within Enter Agora, I'm not going to purchase you a gin and tonic, but I might send you a decent bottle of gin, depending on what your tipple is. And and that can arrive 2 or 3 days later in a nice box, which just says, from Will at Enter Agora, or whatever it's called.
It's its own form of follow-up, isn't it?
Exactly. And what it also has led to has been really interesting. And events tend to be very much where people go with Enter Agora, and for good reason, because you can deliver great events there. But you go for a drink after work. We're talking about the workplace here. So you mentioned culture before. What we're trying to do is to be able to bring clients' cultures into the environments that we build for them. This is perhaps one of our challenges, just to tie culture and challenge together. There is a culture that is fostered in every business and every group of people. I was talking about dividing them before, but if you're trying to create a space where a client's culture is central to the design, to the architecture and the engineering, if you will, it's virtual, you need to be able to engage clients on a really different level. So most of our clients at some point or other are building 2 or 3 headquarters around the world in the physical, but they have an architect. The architect comes in, it takes about 3 years before a spade goes into the ground, and then it comes out looking like what the architect wanted it to look like ultimately, and generally brilliant, because architects are great, but it doesn't reflect the client that well. So one of our challenges is explaining to the client that we don't have an architect. You are the architect. So when you sit, anyone who's been lucky enough to go to Google's offices, they are a physical manifestation of their culture. No, most corporates don't have firemen's poles and ball pits. And I'm not suggesting you need to have, but what is this? What is the cultural representation of your business, and how do you control that? We've learned over the last 3 or 4 months, the best way to do it is to engage as many people in the design as possible. Because what the CEO, you guys are CEOs, what the CEO sees versus what the chief marketing officer sees versus a salesperson versus somebody who works front of house are all completely different experiences. So getting enough people on those calls and engaged to be able to create the right space for a client is one of the biggest challenges. And
I was just going to say, though, as well, I imagine with something that's virtual that you have a great deal of agility to change. If you set up a physical event, it's set, isn't it? Whereas if you will need additional breakout areas of virtual, etc., you'll be able to do that pretty quickly.
Absolutely. So we can change content, on the fly. So, of course, there will never be a spelling mistake on a graphic panel in an event ever. But should that ever happen, I'm sure none of us have ever come across it, that can be rectified immediately. But more importantly, you can start with an event space because you want to invite 2,000 people to an event. You have the event, then those people go, but you can leave it on. That, events are finite. They happen over a certain amount of time. And we try to pack so much into events that one of the things that we often don't do is to get to hear from the people that are at the events. So again, another thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to say to clients, don't worry about it being June 14th to June 16th. It can just be June and July and September and August if you wish. And giving people more space to be able to interact with content and to be able to understand the content that they're being shown. So trying to elongate everything, just to make everything less complex by using technology. Sounds like a bit of an oxymoron, but it's not. We can remove complexity and we can remove constraints. You can remove carbon and you can remove cost. And that's where this kind of technology really comes into it.
And for me, I think ultimately it's it's all part of this paradigm shift that has all been sparked off by the pandemic. And as was mentioned earlier, the creative industries and the technology industries are being looked at to support those changes. We're getting towards the end of the session, and I'd like to encourage anybody who is watching to push through any questions before we finish up. And there's one or two that we'll pick up in a moment. But I kind of tying all this together now, guys, I'm going to ask you to put your get your crystal balls out, in the sense of, the whole event is around gearing up and being ready for the next 10 years. So, with your futurologist head on, how would you see CogX being in 10 years' time, Julian? How do you envisage how things might play out? Would it be completely virtual in something like Will's product, or highly intelligent AI-driven interactions like Headroom? How do you see it playing out?
Well, hopefully the options for all of the above. So, I think it'll depend on the event and on who you are and why you're going. I think sort of it'll split into, you'll want to make the investment to go in person to certain events because the quality of the people, the relevance of them, the relationships you have will make it worthwhile, and you get a lot of value out of it. And then on others, it'll be much better not to spend the time, money, and carbon flying, and to dip in and get the value from an event that more easily. And one can imagine, with technology, hopefully by then we'll have some sort of VR and AR working well. So it could be very immersive. You could wander around in a virtual space that's being built, enter agora, and you can, it'll be a lot more like meeting in real life. People try and replicate real life. There's going to be ways in which it can be better, and ways in which it will never be the same. And so I think concentrating on where you can take the bits that work better remotely and using those is going to be important. But I think it'll spread. I think the small number of events you go to will be hugely valuable, and then you'll spend a lot of time virtually going to things.
Yeah, so better, deeper quality on the ones where you have to make that physical effort and cost, and more flexibility for more events. So about yourself, Will, you talked a lot about this, and your product is maybe one that's going to gather pace in the future. But looking on the wider horizon, how do you see it playing out? Are you on the same page as Julian, or do you have your own views?
I am broadly. I think people go to events for different things, and I don't actually see I don't see hybrid events as half of one whole. I see them as two things. So there are events that I've wanted to attend that I've not been able to. We want to give people the ability to go to those events virtually. So I think hybrid is the way forward. But more interestingly, I think the demographic and I'd be really interested to understand the demographics of those who've attended CogX, but I think it's going to get much younger. I'm 43 and pretty much over the hill when it comes to technology. There are 20-somethings in my studio that know things that I will never know. I'm hopeful that with a more social and more intellectual consciousness that young people tend to have these days, I'm hoping that we're a little bit more. I think we'll be kinder to one another, and I think our events will allow people to interact with them in lots of different ways. And one of the interesting things I found out was those quiet people at events. I'm not one of them, but there are people that kind of stand at the poser table and wait for somebody they know to turn up, and even then they'll only talk within those small groups. Take those people and you put them into a virtual environment, they completely change. Not always, but often, and you start to hear different voices. So I think CogX in 10 years will. Well, I hope it's a hybrid event because I'd probably like to be there in person and meet some people.
That'd be nice, yeah, absolutely. I think we all want that, don't we? Just keeping an eye on the time, guys, because there's been a really interesting question come in, and I think particularly interesting for you two, based on your products. I think as an example, my wife works in a school, maybe not the quickest adopters of technology. The whole thing with Teams descended on the business, on the school in a flash last year. And certain tools, you see the adverts, Zoom, Google Hangouts, Teams, there are kind of, I won't say they're monopolies yet, but, there are some well-prevalent tools that are knocking about. And one of the questions were, how, taking both your products example, how do you see these additional functionalities integrating into some of these well-known product sets so that you can get the benefit? Will they be third party for yourselves with plugins, APIs, that kind of thing, or do you see them as standalone and being standing up on their own 2 feet with the competition. And with you, Julian, maybe to start with, you're glutton for punishment with being a founder 5 times over. So I guess you have a pretty good idea on how to make it work.
Well, we'll see. The Headroom is standalone, and we initially thought that it would not be. We thought that we would build on top of where people already are meeting, on video conferencing tools, whether that's Zoom or Meet or WebEx and some of these old tools. It turns out that the features we think are important to take the work away and to make it more natural to communicate and add a meeting memory, you can't do those on the current architectures. And so if you want to run real-time AI on audio-visual streams to add these features, you need a different architecture. So it's very hard for Zoom and the others to add these new features. And so we ended up building it ourselves. We're going to make it largely free. It's in the browser, so you don't have to download an app, and it should work well on bad connections on phones. As we build it out, so that anyone anywhere can meet anytime and have a good experience, and mostly for free. So that's our plan.
Free's good. I like that. And about you, Will, slightly different use case, but to finish off the session, thoughts on that for your product set and in general, about how these might work with the established players like Teams, etc.
Yeah, I mean, ours is standalone, so very different price point in that it's not free. We are trying to. I'll give you an example. Live broadcast. You can live broadcast directly into our platform, so that a load of 200 people can watch a live broadcast, via their avatar, wander around, and you can live broadcast into our environment using Zoom, Teams, WhatsApp, FaceTime. So we're aware of the tools that people are already using. I mentioned at the start that the vast majority of our clients are professional services. Very conscious, because I'm sure a few of them are watching. They're wonderful, but they are not the quickest to move. So we have to be aware of the tools that they presently exist. So we're standalone too. We're likely to absorb some of those technologies into the platform where relevant and where needed. So that's going forward where I think it will get to. But like all technology, Zoom will be. It's already free, but it'll be completely free even at a corporate level within no time at all. The tools are always coming. So we're trying to design in an agile way so that not only can we absorb what's here now, but we'll be able to absorb what's in 10 years' time.
Absolutely. And also to continue to adjust to whatever world events throw our way. 18 months ago, the world was a very different place. So maybe that's a good spot to finish off, given that we're talking about the next gen. So I'd like to sort of wrap up the session now and thank both Will and Julian for their thoughts and their vision of how the future might be in the coming years. And maybe we'll meet up here in 10 years' time, guys, to see who was right on the prediction. So thank you very much. Thanks for everyone for joining us. And I'll hand back over to you, Sammy.